putting it into very basic terms, it cannot be right to say you will do with your children what we say or we will not give you money. I mean, that is coercion on any level, and it's not right, and it shouldn't have happened. And I mean, look, frankly, it shouldn't have happened. Parents should be making decisions about their own children. As I've sort of journeyed through, and particularly with COVID, you start to see how these things are playing out, and the forcing of people, into taking products that they didn't want to, really, I think, was highlighted to me during COVID. And of course, that's framed that experience, watching it play out, the frustration of not being able to help more when it came to mandates, help more when it came to people looking to conscientiously object, really has stuck with me and lingered. And I think at the very least, we need to be talking about this. So I've introduced the bill. And so there's a big revenue stream coming to the media from pharmaceutical companies. I think it's just important that people start understanding more broadly than people like you and I, start understanding the playing field upon which we're working, because it's too easy just to open the newspaper and see a story about a peak in whooping cough cases, when in actual fact, the truth of that is that happened 2 years ago and nobody's bothered to correct the ledger. We hear a lot about misinformation and disinformation in this world. That's got to apply to everyone, and people have got to get their facts right. So what that says in plain English terms is we have had a huge amount of people around since COVID that have died that is unusual. Now, how that is not a national scandal and headline news every day, how it is that every institution in the country is not trying to get to the bottom of that. They should be having conferences every day, every week to try and get to the bottom of it, but there doesn't seem to be any urgency. But I think with your opening, when you said this law just came out of nowhere in 2015, the no jab, no pay law, we find that everywhere now. The digital ID legislation that the government introduced was some of the most far-reaching laws in terms of their ramifications, what they're going to mean for Australians in the next 50 years potentially. And they really just sort of came out of left field. I mean, there was a little bit of consultation, there was a little bit of discussion, but it was never really properly fleshed out. The media didn't talk about it. And before we knew it, we've got these laws, and that system is now building around us. Many of us have been worried about that for a long period of time, but that is the model of politics now, is to take sweeping reforms. No one ever talked about that at an election, as far as I can understand, not in any meaningful way anyway. And then now it's law in this country. But the reality is, the more people that know, we've shown people power works, and the example of that, the biggest example in recent times I've heard of that were the misinformation and disinformation laws that they tried to pass a year ago, the Labor government, and I've never seen a bigger groundswell than that. And people really, really mobilised and told, particularly the crossbench senators, but they're all of their members as well, what they thought about this legislation, and it disappeared. It literally just never went to the floor of the Senate as a result of that, because they didn't have the numbers to get it. So, I mean, the most important thing is to have people on the floor of Parliament that get it.
Everyone, welcome back to Health Alliance Australia's podcast. My name is Jeannie Rose Antibrother, and today we are privileged to have Senator Alex Antic with us. And we will be discussing his private member's bill, No Jab, No Pay Repeal Bill 2025, which will allow conscious objectors to childhood vaccination to once again qualify for Family Tax Benefit A supplement, childcare benefit, childcare rebate, and childcare subsidy. Currently, under the No Jab, No Pay laws, families whose children are not up to date with the current vaccinations on the childhood schedule are not eligible for these payments. Just for context, the Social Services Legislation Amendment, No Jab, No Pay Bill 2015 was passed into law in late 2015 and became effective on January the 1st, 2016, in a period of less than 3 months. Senator Alex Antic is a Senator of South Australia, re-elected in 2025, and prior to entering Parliament, worked as a commercial lawyer for 17 years and served as a councillor on Adelaide City Council from 2014 to 2018. He is a fierce advocate for individual rights and a powerful voice in Parliament who votes on parliamentary bills independent of party lines. He has a powerful social media presence and is well known and respected. Welcome, Senator Antic.
Thanks, Jeannie. Thanks for the intro, and thanks for the invite. Come and have a chat.
Yeah, it's wonderful to see you here. I thought we'd just start off first and ask, why did you get into politics, Alex? I mean, you were a successful commercial lawyer. What made you throw your hat in? What inspired you to get into this game, or this dirty game?
Question I ask myself every day. I don't know if I'm going to have a good answer, but I'll give you an answer. Look, I think the answer is that there's a long-standing interest in politics. You know, we talked a lot of it around the table at home, and it was always something that was of interest. By the way, the stock standard answer for politicians here is because I wanted to serve and I wanted to, you know, and all of that's true, right? I'm not meaning to be flippant or sarcastic about it, but the truth is that I think it is a very important world to have a divergence of views in. The politics I've found is very one speed or maybe two speed. And so I always found myself, you know, some would say I've been a bit of a contrarian through my life, but I don't know. But I always found myself wanting to have a bit of a say about some of these important issues. I got involved in the party structure probably 15 years ago, something like that now, and never really with any great hope or expectation of getting involved in politics, but just doing what I say to people now to do is just get involved, and you never know where it might lead. Okay. And one thing led to another, one foot in front of the other, and before you knew it, I was standing for pre-selection for the party in the Senate in 2018, hoping to, you know, I mean, look, they're all hackneyed kind of concepts, but bring a bit of common sense back to politics. And I got pre-selected in third position on our own ticket, which put me in sixth in the election, just scraping in 2019, just barely. And here we are today. So, and, you know, like I think, you know, politics is one of those rare privileges where if you do, you know, you are lucky enough and fortunate enough to get pre-selected, I think you owe it to try and speak as much truth as you can. And I've adopted that line, I hope. And, you know, I think it's just important to have people that are kind of speaking without fear or favour. So it just all the stars aligned, I guess. It's hard to know exactly why.
That's really amazing that that's how your journey started. It wasn't out of a pure ambition. It was simply because the cards fell in the right place. And you were actually definitely in the right place at the right time. We all definitely needed you during the COVID years. You were such a fierce advocate for people and that time when there was all this military grade psychological, you know, warfare going on. And there you stood quite strong and stood against these crazy restrictions and laws. Or were they even really laws? I mean, you know, rules that we were all subject to. So I thought we just...
it was a tough time.
Yeah. So I thought we'd just get straight to the topic, and you've basically introduced this particular on your, I think it was addressed on the 26th of November. And you've said the principle of informed consent is only obtained under the threat of denying much needed financial assistance to vulnerable families and undermines the concept of informed consent, which goes to the heart of the issue. So with this particular bill, this bill actually got me involved in politics because, as we were talking before, I hadn't vaccinated my children, but I was totally out of the system. The thing was, what I noticed is very similar to how the anti-terrorism laws just came in effect, the hate crime laws. It was very rushed through. We were all asked to put a submission in, and there were actually thousands and thousands of submissions put to, and this is probably before your time in Parliament. And then we were just completely railroaded. I went to one protest. I think I was filmed by Channel 7 because I had a baby at the time. And all of a sudden it was into law. And it was always prior to that, in my experience, there was really no discrimination with vaccination or non-vaccinated. My children, I went to Monash Uni, I used the creche there, and there was only like 10 kids at the creche, but it was just like till informed, not vaccinated. It's like not taking penicillin. But somewhere along the line from the 1990s, really sort of the mid 2015, around that area, about early 2010, something shifted in the public and the messaging. And then it's now suddenly an issue that we could even have this law. It wouldn't have been unimaginable in the early 90s to have ever seen such a law take place. So when you're talking about it, you're not talking about a repeal of this particular legislation. You're actually talking about just inserting ability for conscious ejection. Is that because you don't think that there's the political will at the moment, or we don't have the numbers, or we're not able to achieve that? Do you think it's more achievable what you're proposing?
Yeah, well, they often say politics is the art of the possible, which is sort of a euphemism for you just got to be realistic about your expectations. I mean, I'll go back a step. So you're right, 2015, I think it was the original amendment to the Social Security Act, I think it was, or the legislation which deals with family tax benefits was amended, and it was and we won't get into the jargon of it, but effectively the ability to conscientiously object and still collect benefits was removed. Now, what that means in essence is from that point onwards to date, currently, what we're saying is, right, well, the government will take half of your money, in terms of taxation, just at income tax level. Of course, there's many others as well. Then it will tell you how to best deal with your children under the pretext that you're protecting other kids, which is this very strange concept as well. With this concept of herd immunity. Now, I should say as well, I'm not a doctor, and I'm not going to pretend to try and be one. This is a political argument as much as anything. And then we'll give you a little bit back of it in the terms of family tax assistance breaks and childcare subsidy breaks if you do what we say to your children with our drugs that we get from pharmaceutical companies. When explained like that, I don't see how anyone can say that that's a fair and reasonable thing to do. Parents should be making decisions about their own children. If parents want to go off and vaccinate their children and they believe and their doctors believe that that will protect them, they should be allowed to do that. If you don't want to do that and you take a different view because you're entitled to, because you're the primary caregiver for your children, then you should be able to do that, and you shouldn't suffer from the consequences of financial stress as a result of that. I mean, the number of people that have written to me over the years saying, this is an extremely difficult time. We're struggling already, and now I can't get my family tax benefits and my childcare subsidy because I just am worried. I'm just worried about what this stuff is. Is just overwhelming. Like, I've had, huge numbers of emails, and I hear it from people all the time. Now, if I'd cast my mind back 10 years, I would have been one of those people who would have said, good, you should, you should think about this as a public health issue. I probably wouldn't have been that draconian about it, but I would have said, well, sometimes you've just got to, have the right view from the public's point of view. As I've sort of journeyed through, and particularly with COVID, you start to see how these things are playing out, and the forcing of people, into taking products that they didn't want to, really, I think, was highlighted to me during COVID. And of course, that's framed that experience, watching it play out, the frustration of not being able to help more when it came to mandates, help more when it came to people looking to conscientiously object, really has stuck with me and lingered. And I think at the very least, we need to be talking about this. So I've introduced the bill. It's going to be hard. We have to be realistic about its chances of even progression, let alone being voted on. But at least we're talking about it. It gives me an opportunity to talk about it. It gives me an opportunity to talk to politics about it inside my own party, outside places like this, other places as well. And that's got to be the first step, because I think people's eyes, like mine, have been awakened after COVID.
Yeah, well, we are seeing that in the numbers. I received AMA actually recently put out something in December 2025, which was very very interesting though. They just put that out after you had posted in, put this bill up. And they said it's called a policy analysis of Australia's immunisation decline, December 2025. Now, in that, they're saying the coverage has dropped to 92%. But one of the interesting figures was that school vaccines in Queensland in 2024 was 61%. And in 2019, it was 74.5%. So I do think there is a greater awareness out there, especially since COVID. And a number of high-profile doctors have also come out and said that they no longer support childhood vaccination. I noticed that you did, in Senate estimates, you've been doing very good questions to TGA and ATAGI. Now, there seems to be a very big disconnect between these institutions and the public. It's like they're operating on a different reality to them. So when I was watching you ask about hepatitis B, I felt that that was a very disingenuous answer, that he didn't really give you a straight answer. Why do we need hepatitis? Or she as well didn't. Why do we need hepatitis B? And this is the question that most doctors should ask, especially now since the US has actually taken that off their childhood schedule. But I believe that that's still within, I do believe that you have to have hepatitis B for the no jab, no pay. I'm not absolutely sure. I was told that there's actually 2 schedules. It's very difficult to find this particular information, where there's the recommended and then there's the ones that are recommended for no jab, no play. How have you found those Senate estimates to have gone? Like, what is the purpose of the Senate estimates?
Well, we have them 3 times a year, those hearings. They're rounds of hearings. And really the idea is that all of the heads of department, all of the bureaucrats, all the way through from defence to health to, whatever else, come into the building over a series of 4 or 5 days, and they are open for questioning. And it's all contingent on the fact that the public dollar, so your money, your tax dollars and mine, are being used to fund these departments, and the elected representative should have an opportunity to quiz them about how the money's being spent, basically. So, that leads to a very broad range of questions that are relevant to the budget. And of course, the childhood immunisation schedule is a huge multi-million dollar, if not billion-dollar industry in spending. So it's fair game as far as I'm concerned, obviously. And so we ask departments heads, like from the TGA all the way through to the Department of Health. There are the various bodies it's very complicated. The various bodies that sit below the TGA, the advisory boards like ATAGI and others, questions about whether this money is being well spent, effectively spent, and it should be spent apart from anything else. Hepatitis B was one that we talked about, mainly on the basis of some of the stuff that was coming out of the US. I mean, that MAHA movement has been so powerful and so instructive for people like me as well, the ability to be able to see the questions because a lot of that is just an overlay. The US system is not the same by any stretch, but it's not that far off the Australian system. We have adopted it largely in terms of the schedule and the numbers and those sorts of things. Look, the hepatitis B one was just a flag bearer because it was getting a lot of attention in the US. And the questions that I was posing were things like, well, why does what is the science behind every baby getting this shot at birth? What is that all about? I mean, we were told something like 0.8% of Australians, I think the number was, have hepatitis B. Most of them are identifiable category groups. And so, I think it's important that we point this out, even if we've only got a short amount of time, which we do. We often only get very, very small windows of time to ask sort of very complicated questions. So if that's the case, then how come we're doing everyone, and what sort of studies are being done on these? Are you placebo-controlled testing all of these studies? Have they been done? The answers seem to be disparate. I don't know that they were expecting those answers at the time, but in the defence of the health bureaucrats, they've got to be across a lot of stuff, and they don't have much time to give an answer. So often they take them on notice, they take them away, they come back to you and whatever. But look, I think the important thing is just asking the questions. I don't think it's unreasonable for people like me to say, right, well, you're spending our money. Tell us how safe they are. Tell us how you know, and tell us whether it's, a reasonable thing to be giving every child this therapy at birth when they may not need it, in my view. Yeah. And so that's where we start from. And then, the questions really evolve around that. We've been asking, last week, we asked some questions about the spending. I mean, one of the things that's really interesting about the pharmaceutical industry is they're not allowed to advertise prescription medicine, something you need to go to your doctor for a prescription for, but they can advertise over-the-counter medicine. So think about your hay fever cures and your pain relief cures, or treatments, and they're often owned by the same companies. So they put a lot of ads out. I mean, you see a lot of ads, particularly in winter, for these remedies, these treatments. And so there's a big revenue stream coming to the media from pharmaceutical companies. And that raises some questions, I think. And my view was, well, is the Therapeutic Goods Association aware of that? Are they live to it? I think it's just important that people start understanding more broadly than people like you and I, start understanding the playing field upon which we're working, because it's too easy just to open the newspaper and see a story about a peak in whooping cough cases when in actual fact, the truth of that is that happened 2 years ago and nobody's bothered to correct the ledger. We hear a lot about misinformation and disinformation in this world. That's got to apply to everyone, and people have got to get their facts right. So there's a whole range. I mean, you could be there forever on this stuff, and unfortunately, the estimates, the hearings that we have are pretty. They're pretty quick, and they don't really allow you to drill into things that are very complicated sometimes, which is a shame. But we do the best we have with the time we've got.
So are they actually accountable for what they say to you? Like, is it like a court of law where they're going for perjury? Is that how it works? They do kind of look a little bit nervous when they do come along.
Well, I mean, the answer is yes. I mean, I think probably the most, in defence of the bureaucrats, the most critical thing for them is the political outcome, I think. I mean, and many of them, I think, will be very conscious of that, I'm sure, because, things can blow up and become a media story. At a technical level, yes, they're not sworn in. They don't take an oath or swear on a Bible as you would in a courtroom, but they are subject to contempt, the contempt rules of the Senate, which are similar but different. So they really do have to tell the truth. And there are very few cases, though, I think, of people running afoul of the contempt proceedings, because in order to get that achieved, you've got to go through another committee, which is often controlled by one side of politics or the other. So I mean, look, on one measure, I think people should be sworn in. We've talked about that for a while. That would overlay a different set of responsibilities under the Oaths Act, and it would take some of the the politicisation of making sure the ledger is correct out of it.
So is there any figure, like, do we know how much the government pays for childhood vaccination?
Well, off the top of my head, I'm not sure. It depends on the year. It depends on the schedule. But I mean, I think the number is into the billions. We have spent billions and billions of dollars over the years on this schedule, and so on that level alone, put aside the scientific rationale, but on that level alone, there should be more questions asked about this, regardless of whether the answer is yes, everything's safe, go ahead, it's effective and safe and effective. We've heard it a lot. So, let's assume all of that's true. We should be asking questions all the time, because there is a push from pharma to continue to add things to the schedule, to continue to get things on the pharmaceutical benefit scheme, because that's where the money is coming out of the public purse. So I think more questions should be asked about not just the childhood schedule, but the PBS itself. And we should be doing that. We should be doing it all the time.
Yeah, I mean, you can actually, we've got a system, a Medicare system, where now they've got the immunisations schedule or register, where the government knows who's vaccinated and who isn't vaccinated. And all of a sudden, post-COVID, people who aren't vaccinated suddenly got letters in the mail, like out of nowhere, after years and years, decades never hearing from them. Please go get your COVID-19 vaccine, to the kids, literally. And there was never a letter saying, oh, by the way, we withdrew that because of risk of, there was no, it's only a notification one particular way. But I'm just wondering, is it ever possible, do you think, to get a statistician in there to, blank out the data, but to actually see the health outcomes of the unvaccinated children versus their Medicare record? And you could actually even put a dollar value on it in terms, if you want to talk about Senate estimates, you could say, well, how much does an unvaccinated child really cost versus a vaccinated child?
Right. Well, of course, that study was done recently in the United States, the Henry Ford study, of course, which we asked the Therapeutic Goods Association all about. And they told me, well, they're aware of it. They monitor a lot of studies, but I think, just to sort of, as a roundabout way of repeating what they said, I think they said, it was non-peer reviewed and all this sort of stuff. So, whatever. The answer to your question is, could it be done? Yes, of course it could be done. I mean, the institutions that have the information are the Department of Health and all the underlying bodies and authorities below them. They've got all the data. So, and in fact, we've tried, just as a sub question, we've tried to get comprehensive, as have others, comprehensive data on the post-therapy reporting that was done on the COVID vaccination, the sort of the safety testing, if you like. They they originally, during the middle of the COVID period, released a document to say this is what we were going to do, you know, in order to monitor it, to make sure that it's safe and effective. And we don't know. I mean, they just oh no, there's too, you know, when we try and get the FOI or try and get the documents out of them any other way, they simply say, oh no, it's, you know, we can't, there's too many documents, there's thousands of pages. We even tried to move that as a motion through the Senate. We, you know, like the Senate itself, if there's a majority in the Senate, can order the Therapeutic Goods Association to produce the documents with none of the kind of confines of the freedom of information legislation, and the government voted against it. So, you know, I mean, the very, very, very basic entry level is to have access to the data, and that is a difficult process itself. Like just getting access to the raw data to have someone who's interested kind of, you know, talk to it and study it is really, really hard, even for people like me.
Yeah, and it's interesting that the ABS has now really stopped producing excess death reports too.
Yeah.
So it becomes quite problematic for us to actually get the whole truth. And therefore we end up having to essentially split into various camps based on our own observation, because how can we even deal with this issue if we're not getting correct data?
Well, look, I mean, I think, and look, I look at the sort of things that Secretary Kennedy's doing in the United States, trying to get access to this data, and you know, I mean, he and his people are now battling the machine themselves. So if it's hard for him, it's hard for anyone. But they're starting to get to the bottom of some of this stuff. I mean, people. I think this sounds ridiculous and it's not very helpful for the immediate term. But I think people's awareness is the critical thing. I think people need to be aware of the fact that the questions aren't being asked sometimes, not always, but sometimes. And look, people need to be involved in politics. I keep saying this all the time. I mean, I'm proof of that. I mean, the normal path to politics, you know, in the modern era is from the Labor side, you're either a trade unionist who then goes and works for a minister and then you become a politician. The Liberal side, my side, has historically done something similar, which is a lot of people who work in political offices go and become the member. And you get this sort of swamp that just talks to itself and not the outside world. The critical thing is getting people from the outside world that really are genuinely, you know, interested in, and many of those people are. I mean, on both sides of politics, they are very good people, but we need people that are not, you know, that are bringing their own interests into the machine as well and supporting those who are doing it. So I just think we've got to keep asking the questions. We need other people to keep asking the questions. And, you know, that's what's happened in the US. The Trump administration got someone who was across the details, who the establishment did not like and does not like. But I think he's going to be, I think on many of his fronts, he's going to be proven correct through the course of time. You just need brave people in politics. It's as simple as that.
So you think that more people should get involved, and that's one of the things. In terms of your petition, is that something that people, is that a way to get more coverage? Is that, are we trying?
I think so.
What
Part of the awareness.
How are we, in terms of strategy?
Yeah,
how do you see the
part
strategy?
of the awareness process. I think that is important. There's one step, you know, like, I mean, petitions are a very important but small stage in the entire process. I think apart from anything else, they're good for people to share because they see something's happening, they understand it, and then they add their name to it if they want, or they just send it on, or they just delete it, whatever the case may be. But at least they know something's happening and there's a question to be asked. So we do them on important bills that we put forward or important matters. And they are important. And at the end of the day, I think that one is a letter to the Prime Minister that we write to him and we say, well, you know, X number of people have seen this and agreed with it. You should think about this and you should do something about it because so many people have. Now, what happens with that, I can't control. I assume someone in his office will look at it when it's done and presented and say, well, okay, don't know, whatever. But the reality is the more people that know, you know, we've shown people power works. And the example of that, the biggest example in recent times I've heard of that were the misinformation and disinformation laws that they tried to pass a year ago, the Labor government. And I've never seen a bigger groundswell than that. And people really, really mobilised and told, particularly the crossbench senators, but they're all of their members as well, what they thought about this legislation. And it disappeared. It literally just never went to the floor of the Senate as a result of that because they didn't have the numbers to get it. So I mean, the most important thing is to have people on the floor of Parliament that get it. And that's what I've been trying to do in South Australia by getting people back involved in politics, involved in the party. And we have slowly been introducing people that are across these issues. But also, I think it's important that you're talking to your MPs and your senators and your local members of Parliament at state level and your councillors, because, you know, we've seen how that does work. I mean, it literally does. It's a lot of effort. But I think with your opening, when you said this law just came out of nowhere in 2015, the no jab, no pay law, we find that everywhere now. I mean, the digital ID legislation that the government introduced was some of the most far-reaching laws in terms of their ramifications, what they're going to mean for Australians in the next 50 years potentially. And they really just sort of came out of left field. I mean, there was a little bit of consultation, there was a little bit of discussion, but it was never really properly fleshed out. The media didn't talk about it. And before we knew it, we've got these laws, and that system is now building around us. Many of us have been worried about that for a long period of time, but that is the model of politics now, is to take, you know, sweeping reforms. No one ever talked about that at an election, as far as I can understand, not in any meaningful way anyway. And then now it's law in this country. So, you know, I don't know. I think in many ways it's about getting people as far away from commercial TV and the bread and circuses that are in their life and starting to understand what's really going on around them. Because, you know, before you know it, you turn around and all the powers are there. We call it a turnkey society. Next time there's a pandemic or whatever it is, you can well imagine COVID happening now. The digital ID system is on. That can be tracked. You're quite right about the immunity register. I mean, the government knows, you know, which immunizations you and your children have had. They didn't, you know, that was one of the things we were looking at during COVID, was trying to get people, not registered on the immunity register, or asking the government of the day, which was my government, to take some steps there so that they couldn't be discriminated against at state level. So there are all sorts of things that are now sort of locking people into this framework, and they've just got to start getting more interested, I think.
Yeah, I guess they feel a sense of helplessness, that, you know, everything goes so fast that we've basically gone from one law to another. And then when you're just still fighting one particular issue, up comes another. And so what I'm seeing is that people are just not complying. That's the digital ID for directors. That was an epic fail. And people just didn't sign up for it. And has anyone been fined yet? So, you know, that's one aspect, I guess, of this particular no jab, no pay legislation, is people are finding workarounds, paying off doctors. So we're getting a sort of a level of corruption there to get the vaccine certificates in order to get their children in childcare. And I mean, obviously they know about it. It's been put in the media. And then they've obviously got their own little childcare groups where parents share the care of children. So people are finding ways around it. But so you're saying to people that get involved in politics now, are you finding with the politicians that you know and the people within your party, do you find that people are becoming more aware of digital ID, having cash, remaining independent, the sort of impending digital state kind of control? And obviously vaccination is also part of that whole like big mechanism, if you like. It's all one big, you know, it all pulls onto each other.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, I'd love to say that there was more awareness in Canberra of how we're worried this will play out. You know, I mean, I think, you know, about 2.5, 3 years ago, I just as a sort of a, interesting little point to make, a local park in Adelaide had a board up, and it had a series of things that it could tell about you, or about the park really more than anything. The park, the screen would show how many people had walked through there, how often the lights were on, how many times the barbecues had been used, how many times the toilets had been used. Very basic technology, but it was doing it through very basic sensors, Bluetooth sensors and mobile phones. So, presumably it didn't know exactly who, maybe it did, I don't know, but, it could tell the numbers that were going through the park and the usage. And they were sort of promoting it as a really important thing because it helped them, take care of the park, look after the barbecues, look after the toilets, work out who was using what equipment. But it struck me that that was exactly what we've been talking about during COVID, this sort of monitoring that we didn't even know was happening, was actually happening. So, we did a little video short piece, and it really sort of caused some waves. I think a lot of those things that we talked about all that time ago now are starting to come true. Now, we do have a digital ID system now. There's more surveillance than there's ever been. We've talked, since then, we've talked about 15-minute cities and all these things that people in the sort of the one stream of politics seem to think are not real but are real. And so, it does take time for people to get used to these concepts. I always say, in fact, we talked 2 years ago to an expert in America about the extent to which modern cars are listening and tracking to people. Senator Bridget McKenzie raised that in estimates just this year. And I think the Privacy Commission suggested that they were actually aware of this now, and that they were looking at some of these companies and what they do with your data. When you plug your phone in, where's it going? What are they watching? Who's doing this? Who's doing that? So I think there's a whole heap of things that politics is not across yet. That's why it's important that we've got people in there. That's why I'll keep talking about it, because I think raising awareness among people who are already in politics is a very short circuit way of doing it. Having more voices in there that understand this stuff is really, really important. And these are not, I mean, they'll get painted as, and I'm sure this would get painted as, an unusual conversation for an elected senator to be having, but they're really very basic principles of freedom and liberalism. Like, I don't want the car knowing where I'm driving. I'm not driving, I've got nothing to hide, but I don't know what they're doing with the data, and I don't know how it could be used in future, is the point I'm trying to make, that this turnkey society. I mean, how do we know that in a new pandemic, that data won't be used to show you not moving through, your own zone, like the Melbourne had the Ring of Steel, those sorts of issues that we were told were never going to happen. We were told QR check-in codes were only just for COVID, and then we found out that they were being used in investigations, and So look, I just think we have been, in this country in particular, we have been very, very, very lazy with our freedom, and politics hasn't protected the boundary as overzealously as it should, and it needs to. And we need to have people in there that are really conscious of this, so that people don't have to feel like they have to do the wrong thing in order to get around bad laws. I mean, that, I'm not endorsing anyone doing anything illegal, of course, not at all. But, we shouldn't have people being put in that situation, is my view.
Yeah, when they've got food to put on the table, especially if they're like single mothers or fathers who do rely on Centrelink and need to go to work. And even dual income families, I mean, it's almost impossible to raise a family these days without two incomes. So it's not just an sort of an additional extra in terms of childcare isn't something that in the past people were opting into. Like when I was growing up, most of the kids, their mum stayed home and looked after them.
Right.
Whereas now it's the opposite. So where a large number of children are actually in childcare centres and family daycare centres. So they do rely on these particular payments. So it is, I mean, would you say it's almost a form of conscription?
Well, I mean, I guess conscription, I guess, has probably a particular definition. I mean, I do think the point about informed consent is the real one. I mean, I don't, on any measure, putting it into very basic terms, it cannot be right to say you will do with your children what we say, or we will not give you money. I mean, that is coercion on any level, and it's not right, and it shouldn't have happened. And I mean, frankly, it shouldn't have happened from my side of politics as well. It just should not have happened. If we're the party of freedom of individual liberty, then parents should be the people that make the decisions about their children, free of coercion. So they shouldn't have to say, well, if I don't do this, then we won't be able to eat. And I mean, I'm sure those cases exist. I'm sure I know they do out there in the community, and that's wrong. So it's as simple as that.
And there's no vaccine compensation scheme, is there, in Australia, unlike America?
No, I don't think so. No, and I actually had a really interesting conversation myself on my podcast, which I did with Aaron Siri, who was the lawyer who was actually the one that introduced some of those that testimony into Congress in the United States earlier or later in last year. They do have a scheme. Look, I don't think any of these government schemes are very generous. The COVID vaccine scheme was, just thoroughly unfit for purpose. I mean, I'm glad some people did get at least some money, but there are many people that have been injured quite badly that are never really going to be fully compensated for what happened. So no, look, and that is something to look at. Now, I don't believe there is a scheme in Australia for routine childhood vaccination. I don't think.
Because it certainly would, if there was a scheme and people registered and said this is the number of vaccine injuries, it would certainly show up in the data. It's another, I guess, way of
Yeah.
collecting the data. I did speak to Russell Broadbent MP last year, and he told me, because he was putting stuff out on vaccination, childhood vaccination too, and he told me he'd received thousands of emails, some very heartbreaking emails and stories about vaccine injuries and deaths from childhood vaccination. I don't think parents are really truly informed of the risk of death. In particular, there was one vaccine that I looked up, which I think was the Hib one. And I just looked it up on the the Dane database for Australia, just for the period from when no jab, no pay came in to current day, and there were 17 deaths that were correlated or associated, or they say they can't be absolutely proven to this vaccination. Now, it's not that when you are getting a childhood vaccination at all, I don't ever remember anyone saying, oh, by the way, this could cause death to your child or these serious illnesses. It's always painted as safe and effective and just take it. So I was wondering, I mean, how do we tackle this particular issue of informed consent? Even with pregnant women, often they're in a very vulnerable situation when they go to hospital. Now, when I was having children in the 90s, there was no vaccination. Like, it was like, you don't touch a pregnant woman. Pregnant women don't have vaccination, medication, or whatever, as far as possible. Now it's like, I think it's like 3. So how do we, is there a way, legislation way to force or to make full consent?
I mean, there is. I mean, anything can be done. Parliament is sovereign; it can do whatever it needs to with the healthcare system. That the Parliament will vote on. So, look, I mean, you make a very good point actually about that. I mean, and it's something to consider actually. This concept of, the doctors should before every shot. Maybe we should look at that. Give the information. Read out the sheet. And because I mean, a lot of the potential side effects are in there. Now, I mean, the argument would be a lot of them are not as well, because it's never been studied properly, some of these, the placebo-controlled testing. So, on one measure, having a regime where the doctors read out the potential side effects, you would only get the side effects that pharma themselves are reporting. So there's a few little bits in there. But look, there are lots and lots of things that could be done, that should be done. And, I think we have to, at this point, look at these sorts of things as being, picking on the lowest hanging fruit, I think, as a starting point. And I mean, from my point of view, simply giving parents the autonomy to do what they think is right, because, parents know their kids. I mean, I have had many examples of people telling me that, children have had an adverse reaction, but then they had to go back and get the next lot. But many of these doses are 3 or 4 told. I mean, I think, MMR is 3 doses, and I think DTP might be 4 or 5 even. We were told it might be even more throughout the course of a child's life, which raises other questions. So, I mean, there should be more awareness of the risks. Whether they're small or large or whatever, people should be able to make the decision themselves and do so without any, financial coercion.
And, I don't know if you know, but in the past, if you had a reaction to a vaccine, you were automatically able to be given a medical exemption. But these days, because of the rules regarding medical exemptions, that's not the case. And they actually invented this thing called a resus clinic, where parents would go whose children had reaction to previous vaccination, where they could be resuscitated if they fell into some sort of cardiac arrest or something, which is quite of horrific when you actually think about, sending a parent whose child had a severe reaction again to be resuscitated, to save a child from a disease, to be injected with that, even though the actual process, they know, has already caused harm the first time round. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? How can, like, in terms of doctors' compensation, I think there's been a lot of things going on around about, and talk really, not rumors, but various things put out. Let's say, for example, the COVID vaccination, of how much they were paid to ask you if you had the COVID vaccine, how much per shot, and so forth. We don't often see those particular numbers in terms of even childhood vaccine or the COVID vaccine, in terms of what are doctors getting compensated, in terms of what are their financial interests in this matter. And I think it would be quite interesting for people to know.
Yeah, look, in Australia, I don't think we follow the same system as the United States. I know that there's a lot of talk in the United States over the course of the last few years about the sort of money that doctors made, as an incentive to getting the schedule and the COVID shots. And there have been some high-profile doctors that have made the observation that, not giving COVID shots cost them millions, literally millions. I don't think that's the same in Australia. I mean, here, a doctor would be paid, whatever they're charging, minus the Medicare, rebate that comes off, and the person themselves, the patient, doesn't pay. I just have to bear a bit of ignorance on this. I'm not aware that there are any financial incentives to doctors to specifically give those injections or therapies. I don't think that's the case in Australia. But look, I mean, the reality is, just as I said, I think the doctors try and do the right thing, honestly. I think most doctors are doing the right thing. My concern is what's coming down the pipe in terms of the information they're getting, how that's being handled, and the pressure that's on them as well. I mean, we see a full court press in the media about, if ever there's as I mentioned, if ever there's a spike in a disease or whatever, we're seeing it at the moment. There's a lot of media reporting on about dropping childhood vaccination rates, and this is terrible and whatever. But I mean, they've never stopped and asked the question, why? The media's never stopped, as far as I'm aware, and said, well, is this perhaps something to do with the confidence that people lost during COVID? Now people are asking questions. Shouldn't we go out and give them confidence by showing them all the data and showing them all the proper tests, the placebo tests that haven't been done, all those sorts of things? They haven't taken that path. When I asked the question about why placebo-controlled testing wasn't done, the answer I got back was, during Senate estimates, was because it would be unethical. And I think the rationale to that is you would have to have a control group of unvaccinated children, which would be unethical. It's like saying, I'm not going to give an analogy because they're always wrong, but like that just I'll get off on some tangent. But it doesn't make sense to say that, we think that our product is so good, we should be giving it to everyone. Therefore, it would be unethical to have a group that hadn't had it. I mean, how does that test something properly? And when we see evidence that there is, perhaps better health outcomes for kids that are unvaccinated, it is a study. It may not be peer reviewed, but at the very least, I would say our regulators here should be saying, well, we should do our own one that is peer reviewed and do it properly. Let's get to the bottom of it. Why are we not doing that? We should be able to answer those questions. So they're the sort of things that need to happen. And I think people need to be, I have never seen more hesitation, honestly. I get a lot of parents that now say, what do you think? I say, I'm not a doctor. I don't know. I'm not here to give health advice. I'm just here to try and find the documents and look for the politics of it. So, but there's a lot of concern out there, a lot.
And what about the TGA? Where is that funded by?
Well, it's funded by you and I to a certain extent, but they also get a lot of their funding from the industry themselves. There was a British Medical Journal article written by Marianne Damasi, who is an excellent independent journalist. She used to work for the ABC, and she now has her own Substack. She does a lot of excellent work, and many years ago she crunched the numbers, and she concluded that it was 96% of the funding from pharma from TGA came from pharma. So you want a product licensed, you pay an application fee, and that's the way it is. They say, I asked them that question in estimates, they say it's much lower, it's only 92%. So that's a problem, but they are publicly funded as well. One of the things I think that should happen, though, is I think that regulator should be wholly publicly funded. Because I just think it should be. It just makes for better outcomes. You have to have a regulator. There's no question about that. So yeah, that's a bit of a. That's another thing that could happen. I think there really does need to be a broad review of all of these. These methods that we're doing things publicly, generally when it comes to health. I just think it's not an unreasonable thing to do. Lots of money, huge budget lines in health. They should be reviewed all the time.
And so essentially what's happening through this discussion is you're saying the media is often driving a certain narrative with all of this. and getting into like the public's head in a certain way about how they should perceive vaccination. And then I'll bring out their
Yeah,
various experts that will reinforce that. Because when I look at your Senate estimates questions and the answers given, there literally should be headline news. No placebo study on childhood vaccination. You know, all of these things are not front page news.
that's right.
And
That's
even with
right.
the COVID-19 vaccination deaths, I mean, it's literally silence in the media, despite we don't even know, like we can't even count. I mean, we've only got the ones in the database, and even the ones in the database, they don't come out because apparently we
I'll
would.
tell you the other thing as well, just on that subject. Sorry to cut you off there, but
Yeah,
the other
sure.
thing is the excess death rates. I mean, I cannot imagine a world where, and I think this rate I haven't checked recently again because they've now, the ABS has made it very difficult to get the figures without drilling into them. But I used to watch them carefully, and they, for the longest time, for the years after the COVID period, they were hovering between 12 to sometimes as high as 18% over the 5-year baseline data. So what that says in plain English terms is we have had a huge amount of people around since COVID that have died that is unusual. Now, how that is not a national scandal and headline news every day, how it is that every institution in the country is not trying to get to the bottom of that. They should be having conferences every day, every week to try and get to the bottom of it. But there doesn't seem to be any urgency, despite people like myself and others, Senator Malcolm Roberts and many others, Senator Matt Canavan. There's been many people that have raised this over the course. It doesn't seem to be getting any attention at all. And I just, the mind boggles that the media will report on what the media wants to report on that's good for them. I'm in the process of developing another bill, which is, if passed, which is going to be a challenge once again, but it gets us talking about it, would require the media itself to maintain a register of interests. Where are you getting your money from? Tell us. Put it on the register. I have to do that. I have to do it. They're very, very strict requirements on politicians to put their, where you get your money from, and so forth. I don't understand why the media doesn't have to do it. They get public money through they get a public broadcast license. And they have a lot of influence. And, some of the, I think the public broadcasters do have to do that, but the commercial media, the mainstream media doesn't. And I think it'd be very interesting to know that without knowing or asserting anything. I just think it'd be a good process to know who's getting what from where.
Yeah. And we actually haven't, I don't know if we've got the data yet for the perinatal deaths, like the miscarriages and stillbirths. I mean, we only hear in roundabout circles. I think a friend was saying that within his own family, since the COVID-19 vaccination, they've had five losses of babies. Is there any data yet coming out? Because I mean, they keep talking about this crashing infertility rate and how our population is declining, but yet they're not looking at, say, the elephant in the room here.
Well, I don't think the correlation is getting any attention as far as I'm aware. In fact, I suspect it would probably be fobbed off if the question was asked, which is why it's important the data just be out there, because then people who are independent can make their own assessments and study it in their own way. So that's the most important thing. They always say sunlight's the best disinfectant, and that's true here too. We should just be having access to the data. I mean, that includes some of the studies that are relied on to get the approvals as well. Some of them are out there, but as I am, my lay understanding of it, which is not always good, is that a lot of the data is just held, commercial in confidence. So, I think, and I can understand that. I mean, pharma puts a lot of money into creating new compounds, new products, so they want to protect some of that. But, safety has to be the issue. No one's suggesting that these therapeutics don't do a lot of good in some circumstances. I don't know the answer to that. All we want is to know that things are safe and to know that that process has been done properly. And at the moment, you can't say with any confidence that data's out there across the board.
So just on this particular subject, how can they justify closing the vaccine compensation scheme for COVID? Was 2014 they closed it? 2024,
Yeah.
I mean, how's the rationale? Is it that if you didn't get injured or die within a set period of time and you didn't file the claim then nothing can happen. When they're still giving out COVID-19 vaccination. In fact, I'm not sure about you in South Australia, but it's actually still mandated in certain areas in Victoria.
Yeah. The rationale, I don't specifically know. The budget line would have run out. They would have had a 3 or 4 year budget line for the scheme, and that has run out. So, and I guess, look, I don't know. I suppose the rationale is, there were no long-term effects, which we know, is sketchy at best to say that. Therefore, if you didn't have a problem, an adverse reaction in the first 3 years or so, but you're quite right. The injections are still out there; they're still being given, I think the point you make about compensation schemes is a very valid one. I think if we're going to force parents to do this, then we should have some sort of, at the very minimum, some sort of scheme for people to be compensated if it all goes wrong.
Yeah. So anyway, is there anything else you would like to add, Alex, Senator Antic, to this particular podcast?
Look, I guess, as I said, I think, it's very easy for people to be, despondent and to feel like, the system is what it is and it always will be. But I do think it's important for people to be involved. I know it's tiresome and it's, but we need voices from people that are wanting to ask questions at the very least, that understand these issues. Otherwise, they get swept away through politics. And what does it mean? Well, it means getting involved somehow through the political, process. That being the person that writes to an MP, or being the person that gets involved and then goes to Parliament. I'm proof that can happen. It's a difficult road, but it's not an impossible one by any stretch. I think that's the way home here. Politics is very, 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 responds to people power, and that's basically it. And it's always got to be lawful and respectful. But the misinformation laws do prove that people mobilised. I haven't seen a campaign like that since COVID, and I was really, really, really glad to know that people could see this for what it was, which was basically laws which would have given the government the ability to sort of say what was real and what wasn't online. And, that's really scary stuff. But people mobilised and they got it pulled off the books, and it'll come back because that's where we're up to. We're into an era, I think, now where government wants control as much as it ever has, and the industries around them want control as much as they ever have. And that's why it's so important that people are across it. It may be, one night where you don't watch, Married at First Sight, you just get and you understand politics instead. But, everyone's busy, everyone's got kids to take to school or businesses to run or jobs to do or whatever it is. But I think, honestly, the future of the country is at stake here, and, people just need to have their voices heard.
So do you think we could, if enough people join the Liberal Party, we could take it over?
Well, I wouldn't put it in those terms, but I think it is reasonable for people to be involved politically, in a party like the Liberal Party, or people might have different views. They might not agree with some of the things the Liberal Party are doing, but I just think the importance of being involved generally, and I might say it may not necessarily be at party political level either. I just think one of the things I've noticed is that not as many people who have let's say libertarian or conservative views get involved even at local government. And a lot of this stuff starts to percolate at local government level. And I think the majority voices are, largely with us on a lot of these issues. So we just have to make sure that, we've got councillors out there that are talking about some of these things. There might be these issues particularly, because I don't get to talk about state issues as much as I would like, because I'm in federal parliament. I also don't get to talk about local government issues, but we need other people that will. And it might be, representative bodies. You might be a lawyer and you want to get involved in, your local law society, or you might be a doctor and you want to get onto the AMA or one of the other groups. I just think it's important that people get involved somewhere so that we can kind of reclaim some of the narrative here, and it can be done.
So basically, essentially, networking in a way, like to make networking as part of your, I guess, not just for work. Yeah. But on a personal level,
and keep talking to your family and friends, and keep being reasonable. I think what we're talking about is quite reasonable. Asking questions about testing, asking questions about the spending of money. It's pretty hard to argue with all of that. No one, if there's an injection that stops a child from getting sick, then I'm all for it. But I want to know that it's safe, and I want to know that it's been tested properly and independently. And that's all I'm saying. I mean, no one in their right mind. And the concept of being anti-vax, it's a nonsense label that just makes no sense. And we're pro-safety is another way of putting it.
Well, pro-health, yeah.
Pro-health.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, they actually, in my mind, they created the anti-vax movement deliberately for COVID. This is my perspective, because we were literally corralled and herded into it. Most of us were just living our life, doing our own thing. And because they passed the no jab, no pay laws, it sort of brought people together, because a lot of people did actually see it coming in 2015 that they were going to mandate vaccines for jobs. And we didn't realize how extreme things would get, like not being able to go into shops or anything like that, or funerals or weddings. That was probably like totally, if we thought that into 2015, we probably would have been thought to be completely crazy.
Absolutely.
But at that time, and then I realized, they needed a particular group when it came to COVID time. They needed a particular group to point to and say, you're one of those crazy anti-vaxxers or conspiracy theorists. When a lot of us were really highly educated people. Like, I've got a statistics degree, and I actually didn't really make the choice not to vaccinate out of science, because it really wasn't there in 1992. We didn't have the internet. I made it out a faith-based choice, and I was very fortunate, dodged a number of bullets. But like a lot of people, they should have that ability to make those choices, regardless of whether they go by the scientific method or a religious method, or just because, they just don't feel right about it. And if they have the informed consent, if parents were told, your child could potentially die, these children have, do you want to still take the risk? I think a lot of parents would say, well, actually, no, I don't really want to take the risk. But in order to keep the vaccination rate high, they've deliberately watered down their messaging in a way. They watered down the safety side or the informed consent side, so that it's almost, I feel, like a sense of coercion, a form of manipulation, an emotional manipulation. That's what I'm seeing going on with the media, especially with the whooping cough. Now, with the whooping cough thing, because we mentioned it before, they actually whipped that up in the media prior to 2015. So I remember I had a good friend who she chose to vaccinate, and we had babies about the same time, and I didn't. And because of that hype, we ceased to be friends, not because of me, but because she felt that her baby might be at risk if and this is really just the very sad part of it, is the breakdown of relationships that I saw happen way back then, but also during COVID times. And now we're all sort of stuck in various camps, or I feel like we're trying to heal that bridge in a way, because it was so draconian. And people had to choose a side. Essentially, the government said, choose a side, and if you're in one camp, you got to hate on the other camp. And how we heal that divide in order to move forward. I hope that you continue to speak out against this and lots of other things, Senator Antic. You have such a powerful voice, and we're so glad that you got back in again into politics. A lot of people would actually think that you'd be a great Prime Minister, but you'd have to go to the lower house to do that. I mean, imagine the changes that could be made if someone even similar to yourself, lots of people would join Parliament, and we only need so many seats in Parliament.
Well, that's the point. We need lots and lots of good people who are prepared to speak up and speak, for truth, not honestly what it can do for them, this business. I know that's a hackneyed old phrase, but we just need people that are there to speak without fear or favour. That's it.
And we will get the numbers. And it's great that we're raising awareness today on this particular issue. So in closing, people can find you at alexantic.com.au. You're on Facebook, YouTube, anything else? You're on Instagram?
X. At Senator Antic, and Instagram as well. We try and blast it out there. We should have a few more. We're sort of working on other platforms, but that's it for the moment. And we've got our own podcast, Based with Senator Antic, on Spotify and Apple Music. As you can see, the big neon sign behind me there as well. So, but we try and get interesting people, and we try and cover too many topics probably that's good for us. But there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot going on out there, so we'll keep trying to do it.
That's wonderful. You should try and get onto LinkedIn actually as well. I mean, you'll do very, very well on LinkedIn. In closing, please check out our other podcasts on healthallianceaustralia.org, which feature world-leading medical researchers and doctors. If you'd like to support our work, you can do so by visiting the donate page on the healthallianceaustralia.org or join our free mailing list. Health Alliance and myself are also active on LinkedIn, so please join us as well. Thank you everyone for watching. Thank you, Senator Antic, for your time today.
Thanks, Jenny. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.